Welcome to George Washington's Mount Vernon, which is owned and operated by the Mount Vernon's Ladies Association.
Today, we are going to be interviewing General George Washington.
And the questions that we're going to be asking him were asked by our 8th grade students at Northeastern Middle School.
Thank you very much for joining us today, General.
My pleasure to have you here.
So, General, our first question is, where did you receive your education from, and where did you receive your military training from?
Well, my education was mostly from tutors within the home. Had my father not died when I was but 11 years old, I was to go to school at the Appleby School in England, as my brothers had before me. Unfortunately, that made it impossible, and so my education was then relegated to being within Virginia itself. As far as my military education, most of the beginnings of my military education were from books. I have always felt that the knowledge of books was the basis of all knowledge. Until, of course, the time of the French and Indian conflict. That gave opportunity for me to have an education that was no longer theoretic, but was in person. And it was not only within that time, but also watching the example of my brother, my eldest brother Lawrence. He, of course, had served as commander of all of Virginia's militia, and I very much so hoped to follow in his footsteps. He even procured some fencing lessons for me when I was very young.
Our second question is, throughout your long military career, are there any mistakes that you have made? And if so, how did you grow from those mistakes?
Sir, have you ever been on the field in a battle?
Fortunately, I have not.
I don't believe that there's any officer who's been on the field in battle who has not been very aware that he has made several mistakes. There were certainly mistakes in understanding and strategy, certainly mistakes that I greatly regret making. You specifically were asking, how did I come across or correct them? I can tell you that for the most part, experience teaches painful lessons. And more often than not, I found that the way to correct was to learn very swiftly what had gone wrong and at all costs avoid what had occurred before. Most of the time, for me, that was realizing what my army was capable of and what it was not capable of. Until the Baron de Steuben arrived in our camp, we did not have what I would consider an army capable of fighting directly against the English. Once we had that training, our armies certainly were able to put forth the fight that was always expected of them by Congress, but not capable.
What do you consider to be your greatest victory on the battlefield, and what strategy did you use to achieve it?
I think throughout the war there would be few that would argue there was a victory as important as that at Yorktown. And of course this was a siege battle, and so necessarily it is of lines and moving closer and closer to your enemy and making sure that they cannot resupply or escape. Largely this was achieved because of the assistance of the French. Had it not been for them, Yorktown would not have been possible. And largely they're engineers that helped us maintain and organize that attack.
Following up on the victory, not at Yorktown, but at the Revolutionary War, were there any other officer or officers that you can specifically name who without them, victory in the war would not have been possible?
The victory was the work of many, many hands. And I could not even begin to name all of those that had had a hand in it. I would say that I would be greatly remiss if I did not mention Generals Knox, Generals Greene. Certainly, we could see that there were many times that the Marquis de Lafayette provided services that would not be seen upon the field, although his prowess on the field should not be underestimated. But also the fact that he was able to bridge the gaps between us and the French. His service, without such, could we have seen a victory? It's very questionable. And I would even say to that point that Generals Rochambeau should be mentioned amongst those that caused our victory to be completed.
Looking at your presidency, why did you decide to step down after serving 2 terms?
So your question might be better asked, why did I ever choose to serve at all? It was presented to me in such a way that the presidency was a responsibility. and it was a duty that had to be fulfilled. I did not wish to stay for more than one term once it had been decided that I would serve as Chief Magistrate. But I can assure you that my wife, among others, were very reticent to hear that I would serve a second term, and there was no doubt that 2 would be more than enough. And I hope that that sets a precedent that we can expect others to follow.
Well, during your presidency, you pretty much had an all-star cabinet with Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Knox and Mr. Randolph and especially Alexander Hamilton. But is there anybody that you would have liked to also have had in a cabinet, considering that the cabinet positions today are so expanded? Is there somebody that you can think of that you would have liked to have had in your cabinet that was not already in your cabinet?
You are speaking of the advisors, sir.
Yes, sir.
I've never heard of them referred to as a cabinet. That's very interesting. It's a term I might, in fact, employ. Were there others? There were certainly countless others that would have been capable of serving and might have served well. I would hesitate to name any in particular because they had their reasons for choosing to decline these positions. However, those that I had gave extraordinary service, and I do not think that it should in any way be diminished what was accomplished. When we had very little warning, or I should say very little map of where we were to traverse. Everything we did was untrodden ground, and so anything that was accomplished was a precedent in itself.
What do you consider to be your greatest challenge as a leader?
I believe that within a nation that is one of representative government, unity is always the greatest challenge. Diversity is the very nature of representative government. We can all agree that a monarchy is certainly the most efficient of governments, but it is not one under which you will see liberty grow or independence. And so we make allowances and we change our path, and a representative government is certainly one that is very friendly to those ideals of liberty, but it is not always one that is easy to accomplish unity.
Throughout the course of your life, your views on slavery began to evolve. Can you elaborate on when and how those views evolved?
Well, you must recall that I inherited my first person at the age of 11. And so this was very much so the nature of Virginia, and very much so the way of life that I had come to expect was normal. As time went by, of course, I experienced the world and saw a bit more of it. By the time of the coming of the revolution, I can say that my attitudes had changed to the point that I did not wish to see families separated anymore. And there were many writings that one had at their fingertips at the time that were expressing the mindset that this was a great evil and that it must be done away with. It was not only this, because certainly when the war began, I was told that they were going to arm slaves within our army. And I thought this was greatly dangerous. In a short amount of time, I saw that there were many who had been enslaved that showed great bravery upon the field. And so that certainly altered my mindset. And then, of course, the conversations in my military family. Mr. John Lawrence, and of course, Mr. Alexander Hamilton, and the Marquis de Lafayette himself, very much so, one who was a proponent of liberty. Hearing these debates and discussions around our table certainly altered my mindset. And I can say that as time has gone by, I have done what I can to prepare my people for a future and a destiny different than the one that has been in their past.
The last question I have from our students is, could you describe your wedding with Martha, where it took place, and if there's any particular memories you're fond of from that day?
Well, our wedding was rather small. It was held at her house, known as White House. And that had been the house she had occupied with her late husband. As you know, when I met her, she was a widow. My memories of that evening are very scarce, largely because I was quite excited in anticipation of the change in my life that was about to occur. Her children were present with us, And it was a cause of great joy and celebration. We chose Twelfth Night, as it is one that is known for being a celebratory time and one of elevated mood. And so from there, we began a very slow progression before we ever came back to Mount Vernon. I remember those days being full of joy and greetings with family and friends throughout many different areas.
Well, thank you. Those are the questions we have from our 8th grade students. But Mr. Graham has 2 questions that were brought to him by younger students, and we'll like to let him ask those now.
So we have 2 questions from 2 younger viewers. The first one comes from Rowan, who lives in Lake City, Pennsylvania. And he wants to know, did you really cut down a cherry tree?
I have in fact cut down a cherry tree when it was non-productive, sir. Is there some deeper meaning that I should understand behind this question?
Oh, I think he's referring to a legend that you cut down a cherry tree and told the truth about it.
Oh, I see. Well, I will tell you the truth right now. Yes, I have cut down cherry trees, but I rather like cherries, so I do not cut down those that are productive.
Very well. And the second question comes from Eli, also from Lake City, Pennsylvania. And he wants to know, what is life like having false teeth?
That is a question that I hope you will never be able to answer yourself, sir. I can say that I began losing my teeth at an early age. It has been rather unfortunate. It's a rather personal question to be answering. I now have none of my original teeth, and it is troublesome. I can tell you that my favorite dish is fish for a reason. It is very easy to chew.
Thank you, General Washington, for joining us today and answering our questions. We and our students appreciate it. So ladies and gentlemen, next time you're in Northern Virginia and you're looking for something historical,
A bit scientific.
And just all around nerdy.
come check out George Washington's Mount Vernon. You never know who you might meet. That's Mr. Graham.
That is Mr. Gimbi.
That's Mr. Raymond.
And I am General George Washington. Thank you for joining us.
This has been Lessons on the Road. Sir, can I ride your horse?
No,
Can I hold the sword?
no,
Can I try on your teeth?
no,
How about a selfie at least?
yes.